Did you want to say a few opening words, Bob, or do you want me to get into it?
Nope. I want to first welcome everybody that has joined us to MC4's second online training session. This one is on negotiating and understanding your worth to a company. That includes your salary and other potential compensation. This will last 45 minutes to an hour. You will have opportunity to ask questions as we go through the session. And you can do that by raising your hand. You should have a hand that you can hit on your screen, and it will tell us that someone has a question. And when we see that, we can stop and we'll try to address your question at that point. At the end of this, there will also be an opportunity for some discussion. And what I'd like to do now is to introduce you to Michael Cuff. Michael works for a firm called Career Coaching International. He's one of the best coaches that we have in MC4, and you can look up Career Coaching International if you want to learn some more, but they provide transitional coaching and other services to executives of corporations, and we're fortunate that Michael and some of the other professionals from PCI donate their professional skills to MC4 pro bono. So I'm going to now have to switch presenters here, and in a moment you'll see Michael, and he will be starting his presentation. Michael, you ready?
I'm ready, Bob.
All right, you got to bring up your screen.
You ready?
Yeah, but we can't see your screen.
Okay. As now.
We can see it.
Okay to begin?
Yep.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Bob, for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think you mentioned there were 16, maybe 20 people online. So to each and every one of you, first of all, I want to thank you for your service to our country. I also would offer this, as Bob has mentioned, I've helped probably at this point maybe somewhere between 5 and 7 different individuals with their job search. And I would offer the same to you as well. One of the first things we can do is if you want to look me up on LinkedIn, if we're not connected, I'd be more than glad to connect with you. I have close to 3,500 connections that could help you out quite a bit through your networking process. Also, if you take a look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that I'm pretty accessible. So you'll have my cell phone, email, Skype ID, Twitter, whatever. So if you need to get a hold of me, not a problem if I can help you out. So again, feel free to do that. The subject for tonight is how to negotiate. And our first slide talks about how to master the art of negotiations. And I'm going to try to work our way through that from this standpoint. I'm going to try to help you make it more of a science and to help you gain your comfort level. And at the end, we'll definitely address questions. Okay, so I'm just trying now to move my slide here.
Sure.
Bob, I'm just trying to get to the next slide. I'm hitting my key. Is there something I do on the control panel, do you know?
What to do is hit your page down key on your keyboard like you normally do.
Okay.
You have to expand it in the presentation mode.
I've got a full screen on. I don't see why it's not. I'm hitting the different buttons you referenced.
Hit the down arrow key.
On the keyboard itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not moving. It's not changing. And on my laptop on the screen, I've got the full slide. Is it something within the control panel?
No, let's try the version of it that I have.
Okay.
All right, Michael, I tell you what, you tell me when to change slides and I'll change slides.
That'd be great. All right, what we're going to do is go over real quick what we're trying to attempt to learn here today, so you can move to the next slide, Bob. Our objectives are going to be as follow. The main objectives, you can move to the next slide, Bob. Okay, our main objectives are going to be really threefold. I want you to understand go back one slide, Bob, back to 3. The principle of negotiating. We're also going to talk a little bit about what you have to do in terms of determining your own personal values, goals, market worth, and viability, and that's really the starting point. Also, where negotiating starts. A lot of people think it starts at the offer. It doesn't. It starts from the very beginning of the job process, and we'll talk about that. And then also how to develop confidence and the proper language around the various negotiating techniques. Those are the key areas that we're going to talk about. We also might talk about also at the bottom handling maybe some special circumstances. Go to the next slide, please, Bob. Okay, first of all, a little definition. Negotiation is not a confrontational process. It's a process we try to set up where everybody wins. But what happens here is when people think about negotiations, they don't understand there's really 2 parts to it. And the first is what I call salary information. In other words, informing a prospective client or prospective company what your basic salary range is, what you are currently making, and what you're looking for in terms of total compensation. That's totally different than actually salary negotiations, and people need to understand that. Because what happens is you never want to be investing 2 and 3 hours of your time for a job interview when you have no idea what the basic salary range is. So what I tell people is you know what you're making, and you should know what kind of compensation level you need. So when you have that initial conversation with the company, when they're trying to set you up for the interview, that's one of the questions they may ask. And if they don't ask the question, you by all means have the right to ask the question. Again, your time is just as valuable. Just because you're going through this job transition doesn't mean that your time is not valuable. So it's very wise to understand that. A lot of people are afraid to ask for that because they don't understand the difference between negotiating and salary gathering information. And there's a total different process. So I want to make sure that people are comfortable with that. Also, negotiation, this process, salary negotiation, is not like a union negotiation. You're not going to be sticking your stick in the sand and making a real strong statement. It's a win-win process. It's not what I call kind of a tennis court match, back and forth into your court. But there's some very specific things you need to know before you go on an interview. And one of them is, what's the general salary range? And then we'll talk about the best way to communicate that and in terms of what your range is. And also we'll throw in the words and talk a little bit about what we mean by total compensation. So again, it's never a problem, and you'd be foolish to go on an interview without having a basic idea if you're in the general range. But again, that's totally different than negotiating salary. Next slide, please, Bob.
Did you get it, Michael?
If you can get no, I was going to say, if you can get to slide number 5. Okay, great. We talked about before, we want to talk about the 3 principles. Well, the first one is we don't want to lose the offer. And a lot of times that can happen when we haven't done our homework and we haven't communicated up front what the basic range we're looking for, what our particular salary range is. And here's what I mean. I've been a recruiter for a corporation, and now I work for a company that's an executive search firm. That's one of the pieces of our practice. And it's always amazing to me how we get down to what I call the altar time when we're getting ready to exchange vows, and there's a major disconnect between what's being offered and what the salary expectation is. So a lot of times we lose the offer, or you may lose interest in an offer because we're off by such a high percentage in terms of what's being offered, on a base salary. So what I tell everybody is to do your homework up front, and the first piece is, what is it that you need to live on? What is it that you need? And that is kind of like the starting point. The other thing is, if you're there right now and you have a sheet of paper, you want to draw yourself a square. And we're going to put that into 4 quadrants, that square. In the upper left, part of the negotiating process, in this little square, I want you to write the word got to, as in gotta have. The top right square would be nice to. Bottom left square is okay. And the bottom right is so what. So again, we got this square and it's broken into 4 quadrants. Top left, got to. Top right, nice to. Bottom left, okay. Bottom right, so what. You need to know going in what's most important to you. If you are coming out of the military and you're retired, I assume you get some type of benefit compensation as part of your service to our country for such a duration of time. So maybe the benefit piece of the offer is not as critical. Or maybe you're very focused on a very specific location. Because of that, you have a lot more flexibility relative to your base. But the key is you need to take a look at your own finances. What is it that I need to maintain the lifestyle that I have? And then through this process, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to operate through what I call a goodwill type of relationship. Because a lot of times it's not so much what's said as much as how it's said. So what I often tell people is, I'm going to go through here and we'll walk you through some of the things you could consider and need to consider that would be important to a job offer for you. Because some of the things that can be offered are going to be totally different than maybe you're already used to from being in the service. Some of the exact verbiage that we use when you get an offer, is, thank you very much for the offer. I'm honored by your offer. And I want to kind of work together to see if we can finalize this because I'm very interested in your opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. If you can go to slide number 6, Bob. One of the things obviously is you want a positive outcome. You want to get the offer that you're looking for, because when you do, it's a win for everybody. The company's successful, they got somebody they enjoy having on the team, and new talent. And also, it's important from this standpoint, how you negotiate through this process. A lot of times your prospective employer starts to make the assumption, this is how this person is going to conduct themselves when they're in the company. So if you're a purchasing manager, or you're in sales, or you're doing something, or even internal interactions with other employees, how you conduct yourself during the negotiating process to get into the company is also going to be viewed in terms of how you're going to conduct yourself when you're in the company. So it's very, very important to win that, to operate with a win-win scenario. Slide number 7, Bob. And then, of course, the opposite of that would be the negative outcomes. And the negative outcomes, I'll go right down to the what I would call the second bullet there. You've created a negative first impression, because a lot of times the negotiation process goes back and forth. So if you come off too strong through this process and you're not communicating a win-win, you're kind of dampening some of your future requests or some of the other suggestions or some of the other modifications you may be asking for in your negotiation. Slide number 8, please. Okay, I'm going to walk you through some different steps, and some of these you may be familiar with and some you may not. These are some of the different components that, in my mind, are going to be critical for you in terms of how you put together your offer. You can go to slide 9, Bob. Thank you. Okay, these would be some of the major criteria. Obviously, the first one is money, but I want to caution you on that. I know a lot of people that make a lot of money, but they don't have a lot of time in their hands. To me, it's all relative. The higher you go up in income, it's to some extent, it's because the level of responsibility you have, but to some extent also the company is basically buying your time. In other words, there's only 24 hours in a day. Life's divided in basically into thirds. You work a third, you sleep a third, you play a third. Companies are willing to play around with those thirds so that people are working a lot more than a third. So that's a personal choice in terms of how much money you want to make, and you need to assess how critical that is. That's why I say go back to the very beginning. What do I need to maintain the kind of lifestyle that I have? But again, the bigger the role, the bigger the salaries. They're buying your time is basically what's going on. So you got to ensure you're really enjoying that. The other thing we want to talk about, and I mentioned before too, is the benefits. You need to be very familiar with your own particular benefits. I'm not sure if I have people on the phone who have retired from the service or they're just people who are getting out. So I assume for those people who have retired, you do have some type of benefit program coming to you. For those of you who are exiting the service after one enlistment or one term, how you approach benefits is going to be a little bit different. You may also be shocked by the costs of what actually an employee has to pick up, even when considering what the company is picking up. But all these different items here are things that you need to step back and take a look at and kind of put together a priority list of what's important. One of those things will be the work-life balance. I'm not so sure I'm familiar enough at this point. I was in the service from 77 to 81. I'm not so sure I understand how that relates nowadays, work-life balance, over there on the second column, the fourth bullet down, how that relates to the military. But it's a critical issue in corporate America today. You have a lot of people that are overworked and not necessarily enjoying or even having time to spend all the money that they make. So that's a critical piece you want to take a look at as well. A couple other items too. Telecommuting is very good negotiating tool nowadays. Maybe you don't get the salary that you want, but maybe you can negotiate some type of deal where you only have to be in the office 3 days a week and everything else is being done through the computer. Look what we're doing here tonight, for example. Or you could Skype with colleagues and those type of things. So the main thing I want you to get out of tonight is the flexibility and the creativity that you have when it comes to negotiating. But this would be a pretty critical list in terms of, where do I stand on this? How critical of an issue is this for me? For example, I'm working with a gentleman now out in Colorado Springs. He has just relocated to Colorado Springs, and that's where he wants to operate out of. With that thought in mind, then, that's his driving goal in securing his position. I want something, number one, that's keeping me here in the Colorado Springs area. We purchased a home, we have family. So that's going to mean he might have to give up something else on the money or the benefits or some of the other issues. So that's the starting point. What are the key issues? Slide number 10, Bob. And to kind of help you with that, this is basically what you do. Take that list and put together your top 5 and then your bottom 5. And that kind of helps you with your strategy. And that will kind of help you as you start to progress through the offer process on what you can give up and what you can't. It's kind of, you work that in conjunction with that square that I gave you before, the quadrants. What do I have to have? What's nice? What's okay? What doesn't matter? And then you put that together to make your assessment of what's a good offer. Next slide, Bob. Okay. On this slide here, what I really want to talk about is how to stay informed on what's going on within your profession and the particular industry that you may be going into, and understand how to find out what your value is worth. One of the last slides I've put together about 5 to 6 different specific websites that you can go to take a look at and see what's the going rate for an engineer, what's the going rate for an accountant. A couple of things you're going to have to understand, though, is some of you are coming out of the service that may have very transferable skills. If it's accounting or engineering, medicine, something like that. Others may be transitioning out of the military where they have what I would call general management experience. Maybe they led a brigade or they led a squadron, but it was more related to some type of military skill versus a transferable civilian skill. So that's really important to understand where that's at. The other thing you need to think about also is what's the current economy relative to where you're trying to find these different positions, as well as how many other companies or how many potential companies are in the area that allow me to have some flexibility, or are there only 2 or 3 major employers? I want to be one of those, and so I have to kind of settle for that. But I will show you a combination of techniques to kind of get a sense of where you may be money-wise. One of the first things to do is just to network. The more people you talk to, you kind of get a general sense of what the value is for that particular job or for what particular skill you have. Another good way is these different recruiters and executive search firms that you're speaking to. They should have a pretty good sense of what a basic salary range is for the kind of work that you're in. If you're on LinkedIn and you do some blogging, you can get some good information back and forth. And just even like an organization here like MC4, if there's a group of you that have the kind of similar type of backgrounds and trying to transition into a civilian role, you can share that information with each other. But as I mentioned, toward the end of the slide, I have some very specific sites that you can go to. Okay. The other thing you want to be familiar with as well is the company that you're interviewing. Pay will be the best payer in the market, or we're going to pay at average rate, or we're going to pay below the market. So you need to kind of factor that in as well. And some basic Google searches can kind of get you some of that information. And the other thing could be this. Using the tool of LinkedIn, if you're interested in going with Acme, let's just make it up, Acme Corporation, and you have a pending offer or you think you're going to be getting an offer, you can go on to LinkedIn, you can look up some previous Acme employees and just get a sense and see if they'll network with you and say, what was the compensation strategy at Acme Corporation? I see you were there up to 2-3 years ago. How fair were they in pay? What's their approach? That type of thing. So again, use all the different tools. Okay, next slide, please, Bob. Number 12.
Michael, what I'd like to do, Steve Vincent had a question.
Okay.
And so he raised his hand. So, Steve, go ahead.
No problem.
You've got a question, right?
I do, and I'll throw it out now, and if we get to it later, that's fine. But I've used, I think Glassdoor is the website I've used to kind of get some salary information on different companies and satisfaction. But the basic question I have is, as I understand it, the salary is a confidential piece of information, and revealing it, once you're hired by a company, revealing it can be a breach of employment termination. So how can you educate me either now or later in the webinar on what the etiquette is and what is appropriate or inappropriate about discussing the compensation? Because again, coming from a military background where the pay scale is a piece of public knowledge, the whole idea of having it be confidential and how you treat that is new to me.
Okay, no problem. And Steve, actually, the Glassdoor is one of the sites that I recommend will be one of the 5 to 6 sites you'll see on the slide presentation. So good for you that you're already ahead of the curve. In terms of the confidentiality, Steve's absolutely correct. In the civilian corporation, anybody typically caught talking about salary or sharing salary information with other employees inappropriately, a lot of times will wind up in termination or some type of disciplinary action. But speaking specifically about your own salary versus talking about salary levels is totally different. And when you start to interact with the recruiters from the different companies, they'll be able to tell you what the basic salary ranges are. Typically what happens is they're using a company, say for example like the Hay Group or some other major consulting firm that goes out and does all these salary surveys, and then they get a basic salary range for the different job groups and job categories that they have. And you're going to have, it's broken into 4 quartiles. Some companies like to bring people into the first quartile so there's room for advancement. Other companies say we want the best talent that's available, so we may bring somebody into the second or even into the 3rd quartile. So every company is different, but you should be able to see some decent salary ranges so that you have an idea of kind of where your particular level of work is being compensated at, either within a company or within an industry. But again, speaking salary should only be spoken in terms of dealing with an HR person and or the specific hiring manager who may be making the offer, because in some situations, Steve, the offer may not come from the HR department, it actually may come from the hiring manager because it's coming out of his or her budget. Does that answer your question about the confidentiality?
It does. So there's a limited number of people I can talk to about it. I can put it anonymously on things like Glassdoor, but I shouldn't be speaking about my specific salary with anybody other than that select group. Is that correct?
Well, yes, and most specifically once you're inside that company. Now, say
Yeah,
your background's engineering, and say you belong to the American Society of Chemical Engineers, and you're at a chemical engineering, one of their society meetings. To have general discussion, that's not a problem. But I'm talking about being down the hallway next to the water cooler, talking about, well, why do you think you got $2,000 more base salary than I did? That's the kind of stuff that will get you in trouble. But does that clarify that for you?
It does.
Yeah, Steve and Michael, I think, raised the salient point as to why companies don't want that to happen. In fact, it's very common that for 5 people basically performing the same tasks in a professional way, that all 5 of them could be getting paid different salary amounts, different number of stock options and bonuses because of this, not just the salary range, but their individual competencies, skills, and what contributions they have made in the past to the organization, all of which factor into the salary. So
right.
Companies
that's a great point.
Companies don't want to create anxiety, dissent, or angry employees by other people who think they might be doing the same job just as well, finding out that they're not getting paid as much.
That's a great point, Bob. You could have a salary range that would say anywhere between 100 and 140, and one person is brought in at 105, but somebody else basically doing the same type of job is brought in at 115, but that person may be bringing 5 or 6 years more experience, or they may be bringing some new technology that's required or whatever. The other thing you have to remember, too, is most of your managers never feel comfortable bringing in any employee higher than somebody else who's already in the role who might have more experience. The civilian term for that is salary compression. So you have some of those kind of issues as well. But those salary ranges are usually pretty flexible, so the manager can do that. And he may post the job and call it a engineer, but he could have it at level 1, level 2, or level 3, depending on who applies for it. And if you get somebody like at the 15-year experience, he's going to pay more at that engineering level 3, which would fall into that range, say, of 100 to 140, and maybe he slants more to the like 132, versus someone who's an engineer 1 is going to be more toward like the 100 or the 105 range.
All right, so what you guys just got was payback from Michael for all of that military lingo that you use when you talk to us. And what you will find is that there may be nothing more confusing in the civilian world than this whole issue around salaries and how people get paid, levels, what makes somebody a level 2 versus a level 3. And as you'll learn as you get into companies, it's not always as clear as you would like it to be.
And maybe that's why the presentation is called The Art of Negotiating, because it's not an exact science. I mean, when I was in the Air Force as an E4 with so much year of service, I knew what I was getting paid. And now there might have been some additional things if I was doing hazardous duty or TDY or whatever, but if not, take those things away, my pay was just like everybody else that's E4 with my time in grade, time in service. So a little bit different.
So unless unless someone else has a question, we'll go back to Michael's presentation, and if you do have a question, please do what Steve did, which is click the hand raise symbol, and it shows up on my screen.
Yep, very good. And good question, Steve. And again, if we don't get in-depth answers tonight, people can always call me and follow up, but this is good to get the dialogue going. The next thing we want to talk about would then be, again, how do you assess the market, your particular market worth? So the first thing is money itself, and we've kind of gotten into this. There are going to be different ranges, and every company is a little bit different in terms of how they want to pay. The more people you can meet, though, in the different industries, the more things you can do online and research, you'll get a better sense of who's the top payers. The other thing is through talking to other people who have interviewed there. Maybe somebody didn't get a job, but they got an offer, but they didn't take it. You might be able to get some information or get a sense of what's going on. The other thing, a lot of times there's a term, it's called employer of choice. That's a real buzzword in the corporate world. Companies that are considered employers of choice typically are good payers. And they also typically have a good environment, and they understand total compensation. So it's not just base, but bonus or stock options or whatever, depending on what's important. They have a lot of flexibility. And then the other thing you have to remember relative to money is you've got to be pretty realistic here. Does your background and expertise create a price premium in meeting the needs of the company? I always say this, I mean, the more you're going to make is all relative to how much more you can do for the company. What are you going to be able to give back to them? You know, will they be willing to pay you $100,000 and maybe $15,000 more than somebody else because they feel that you can do things that will help them grow their business? But it's real important here to take a look back and think about what are the skills that I have, how current are my skills. Some people may be getting scared saying, look, I'm not going to get the best offer, they think I'm old. So I always use the terminology, it's not how old you are, it's how current you are. And that's why some of these other sites that we talked about, LinkedIn, Twitter, Skype, all these different techniques, that's how you brand yourself on LinkedIn. And that gives an idea of, well, that person, you know, maybe he's been on the earth for a few years, but they've been staying pretty current with the technology. That's the key to that. Do you want to go to slide 13, Bob? The next is going to be actually relative to the second part of that, assessing your market worth, is your expertise. Is your current skill set hot or obsolete? I think about that all the time when I drive through the Pennsylvania Turnpike and I go in Easy Pass now. Who would have believed that 10 years ago those jobs would be obsolete? So that's kind of what you have to think about relative to how you price yourself and get a sense of your worth. How unique is my background and how current is it, and how much can it contribute to actually helping a business achieve a particular business and financial goals? Okay. And the other piece of it is how quickly can you come in and add value? Now, I would imagine most of the people on the phone tonight have been in some type of leadership position, and I can tell you that is a critical skill in corporate America that's dying. Most companies aren't having problems because of technical issues. It always boils down to leadership issues. Okay, so you know your ability to communicate how good of a leader you are can definitely help you add value to an organization. Slide 14, please, Bob. Relationships. For some of you, this would be the third component of this. Relationships can actually help, you know, increase your value, your market worth, your value to a company. You know, do you bring valuable relationships along with you that would help a new organization? If you're a senior military officer and you had interaction with the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, or some other of these government contractors, would those relationships be valuable to a new corporation? Okay. The other thing is your reputation strong enough in the industry that you know would help you get into other companies and open doors and open up new business or new accounts? And then one that's often forgotten is, you know, you get into a new company, do you have the kind of reputation that other people, because they view you as a leader and you have strong relationships, you'll go to other companies? I worked for a bank for about 7 years, and they had a term that they would call a takeout. They'd go in, if they're interested in getting and growing their business, they would go in and take one of the strongest commercial banking leaders in the area, and they would offer him a job and then also compensate him if he could bring along 4 or 5 of his best lenders with him, because those people would automatically then be bringing those relationships with those customers over, and then in turn bringing more money for the bank. So it was a pretty powerful technique. And again, people are willing to pay good money for top talent if they know other talent is going to follow them. It works from 2 ways. Number one, it helps grow their business, but it also reduces their hiring costs. And it also increases the chance that the people come on board are successes and winners. Your top leaders aren't going to bring people over that they don't have a prior relationship with and prior successes with. So it's pretty interesting. And thank you. That's the next slide we want, fit and character. You need to think about that a little bit. That might be some of the biggest transitions if you want to go back to 15, Bob. Some of the biggest transitions for you is getting to understand the culture and making sure that you're a fit, because things operate in the civilian world a lot different than the military world. And you know, people make fun of the government, but I'll tell you this, based on my years in the civilian world and my 4 years in the military and the government is a lot more organized than people give it credit for, especially when you see some of the things that go on in corporate America. But again, you have to understand your own personality and your professional style and how much value it can add when you get into a company, and how it may add value when you start doing your negotiation piece. The next thing we want to talk about is actually what I would call the negotiation continuum, and it starts, when I said before, negotiating doesn't start when you get an offer. It starts from how well you presented your resume, because you're starting to then, this is how you brand yourself. This is the first impression people will have of the things that you've done and what kind of value you can add to a corporation. So one of the things I talk about, and I think I spent some time with Bob, and I know I've spent time with the 7 people I've counseled, is when you're working on the resumes, to make sure your resume is SMART. And that acronym stands for specific, measurement, action, result, time frame. Let me give you that again. The word is SMART. Specific, measurement, action, result, time frame. And what that means is you have statements on your resume that show value. And your resume, as much as possible, now you may not be able to do it depending on your role. You may not be able to talk about dollars, but some of you may have. If you've had large budgets, you can talk, you can document on your resume the budget responsibility that you've had. You can talk about the number of personnel that you were responsible for. You can talk about things in your role or in your function that you either increased, if it was a positive, or things that needed to be decreased. Maybe it was a safety issue on the flight line, or a safety issue somewhere on base, or whatever those particular things are. But remember, you want to have smart statements, and you want to be able to put as much as possible numbers.
Michael, am I on the correct slide?
Yeah, if you go back to 16, we're on the negotiation continuum.
Okay.
Okay, because we're just talking a little bit about the resume piece. And so we were talking about that SMART concept, how critical that is, and that your resume should have, like I say, dollar signs if possible, number signs, percentage signs, increase signs, decrease signs. Because that's what the recruiter is going to start to see. That's what's going to key the interest, and already he's going to start to kind of be making an assumption of the value of this person. All right. Also, when you start to have your first conversation over the phone, all these impressions start adding up, and then eventually you go through the hiring process. It might be a combination of interviewing teams, and then you eventually get your offer. Slide 17, please, Bob. Okay. Very different components of an offer package. The job description, you start to take a look at that, you might get a sense of what the job's going to be valued at just by the level of responsibilities. You might get a sense of it from who you report into, as well as the title. And then we have all these other things. I mean, the offer package consists of the base salary. We want to talk a little bit about sign-on bonus, performance bonus, and then also timing of salary reviews. Now, some of this terminology is probably going to be foreign to a lot of you, but most major corporations, and depending what level that you're at, you're going to have a couple components of your salary, of your compensation. If you can go back to 17, Bob. So there would be a base salary, and then again there may be some type of bonus opportunity. The bonus could be predicated on some type of performance issue, and there's usually some very specific metrics. Other times it might be just as general as it's based on how well the company does. It might be a combination of how well you do in terms of meeting the specific goals your manager put it together, how well your company's doing, and a combination of those factors. So every company's a little bit different. The other thing we often talk about in an offer is what's called a sign-on bonus. Say that you were offered 75, but you would really like 80,000, but the company can't do that for whatever reason. One of the ways to bridge that gap is what we call a sign-on bonus. A sign-on bonus is a one-time bonus. So maybe you get a sign-on bonus for $5,000 to help bridge the gap between the 75 and the 80. From the company standpoint, it's a one-time hit. It's not added to the bottom salary line, and it's a one-time deal, and still allows them to offer you the salary at 75, but maybe use that additional 5 in bonus to get you on board. The other thing you might be familiar with in the military would be your annual performance reviews. Well, in the corporate world, there's nothing that says that you can't, you go back to 17, Bob, there's nothing that says that you can't try to negotiate performance reviews throughout the year. So if you have an offer from a company and it's a little lower than you want, one of the things you can try to negotiate is, could I have an annual performance review twice a year? and again, a chance to kind of increase your salary. And all these things are negotiated on a regular basis. I can tell you in almost my 25 to 30 years of doing that, all these different things are fairly common. Obviously, it's all predicated and relative to how bad the company wants you and what you have to offer. Okay. Let's see. The other pieces that we have here on slide 18, these are kind of what I would call set and fixed components of the offer package. They're things you need to consider. You know, 401k is very important if the company has a pension plan, what the medical and dental coverages are and what you have to pay for those, long-term, short-term disability. But these are pretty much what I would call pretty set and fixed benefits. There's not a lot of negotiating you can do on these, but you need to be aware of the value that they can bring to a potential offer and whether or not you have any of these. And that's all part of that total compensation. So the previous slide, we talked a little bit about what kind of flexibility you have in negotiating, what are some key things. But this slide right here talks about other components of the offer package that are really critical, but you might not have flexibility to negotiate on. Okay.
Hey, Michael, this is Bob.
Okay.
I just want to bring up a point that if you get a job offer that includes stock options, and I won't go into detail, but there's two kinds of stock options, two types of stock options companies offer: ordinary stock options and restricted. If you get a choice between the two, give me a call or we'll get you connected with somebody, because there can be a significant advantage of one over the other in terms of its long-term value to you. Okay? So
that's a great point, Bob. And I'm not sure how many people on the line might already have a financial planner, but that'd be also a good question to go back and do a little study with your financial planner, see if he can give you some insight. He or she should be fairly familiar with the difference in all these different stocks, you know, since they're financial planners.
So I'll give you one real-life example. When I left Honeywell, I had 32,000 shares of Honeywell stock options, and they were worthless because they were ordinary stock options that had a strike price of $65 and the stock was at 15. They were worthless. Restricted stock never goes underwater. So, and there's some technical reasons for that if you get offered options, we can talk about. So I'm going to go back to Michael now.
Okay. Bob, if you want to go to slide 19, please. We're going to continue some of the components of the offer package. Some additional things would be life insurance, an employee assistance program. Most corporations have programs that help employees if either they are having some type of mental issue, substance abuse issue, marriage issue, or whatever, and that's a nice program to have. Some companies even offers assistance with child care support. Vacation, I wanted to mention that real quick. You're not going to get your 30 days as you typically do in the military world. Typically, companies start out with 2 weeks. Getting 3 weeks, though, is typically can be done through negotiating, and there's also some other creative ways as well. A lot of companies have it that you start out with 2 weeks, and after your 5th week of service, you can get the additional 3rd week. But what I tell people to try to do in negotiating is to see if you can get it up front. But again, it's all relative to where you're at in the base salary and what other things are important to you. But if a company doesn't have flexibility on salary, they might have flexibility on vacation. And the other piece you can do with that is you might actually be able to negotiate beyond the waiting period. So you don't have to wait 5 years to get 3 weeks vacation, but maybe after year 1, you get an additional day. Year 2, you get an additional day. So after 2 years, you're up to 12 days now. Year 3, a third, and so on and so forth. So there's all creative ways you can do that. But I just want to make sure that you're aware that not very common, not too many people, unless you're at a pretty senior level, are going to get 30 days or 4 weeks vacation off up front. Other things you need to know is, you know, if you're going to be doing traveling, what exactly is covered in your expense account? You know, because that's pretty important with the price of gas today and tolls. Something else, the parking, that may look kind of goofy to you if you've been spending most of your life on military bases. Probably don't have to pay for parking. But if you're in any major city and you're going downtown to work, parking becomes a real issue. That's something that can be negotiated as well, and or your commuting costs. And then finally, other parts of the offer package, get to know what type of support tools you're going to have in terms of laptops, cell phone, PDAs, and what flexibility do I have for personal use and what's paid, that type of thing. Very critical, and a lot of flexibility with that as well. And again, on that second to last bullet, the commuting cost, don't be afraid to talk a little bit about telecommuting as well. It's a good negotiating tool, and a lot of progressive companies are receptive to that. So maybe if you're worried about the cost, maybe you didn't get the base salary that you wanted, you're worried about the commuting costs coming in and out. Maybe you have a job where you do a lot of data analysis and don't always have to be in the office, or you don't have to be interacting constantly with people. Maybe that's the type of thing where you get a telecommuting deal where on Mondays and Fridays you're allowed to operate from home and you use some of the other tools to communicate with people.
Michael,
slide 20?
Michael, Steve Vincent has a question asking if sick days are standard, and I'll give him my answer. And Steve, yeah, generally sick days either are separated from vacation, so it's 5 days sick, 5 sick days, 10 vacation days, or many companies today are going to something called flex time, where you might get 15 days and you can use them however you want for sick time, vacation, or whatever. Your microphone's unmuted, Steve. Does that answer your question?
It does. So it's I didn't see it on the list from Michael. So what I didn't know is whether that's something I negotiate or whether it's almost like an industry standard.
No, the sick days. Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, let me piggyback on what Bob's already communicated. There's a term that's called, a lot of companies are going with this approach now, it's called PTO, personal time off. Some of them incorporate everything, so you might get 30, but that means that's all your vacation and sick time. How you use it is up to you. So whether you come into work today because you're not feeling good or you want the day off, you use your PTO. Some companies take personal time off and separate it to say you're going to get 2 weeks of vacation, and then we're going to give you another 5 or 7 days of PTO that you can use toward bereavement. Somebody in your family died. You're not feeling good. The wife doesn't feel good. You want to go to your son's soccer game. Every company is a little bit different, and typically when you start to move along in the hiring process, they'll give you the benefit information, and most of your larger companies will actually have the benefit information and the benefit package on their homepage. The comment on the flex time is a little bit different, Bob, from this perspective. Flex times means, all right, our company is going to operate from anywhere from 7:30 in the morning to 6:30 at night. So for those of you who want to log your 8 hours from 7:30 to 4:30, that's fine. You got the flexibility to do that. For those of you that rather be at home and see your kids get on the school bus, you can start as late as 9:30, but that means you got to stay till 6:30. So that's a little bit of kind of a flex time. Does that clarify that?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Other components, again, as I mentioned before, this whole concept of the virtual office, it's cheaper for companies to have their employees work at home when it makes sense, because they can have a smaller operation and pay less rent. So some industries and some companies are more receptive to that. IT is real big into that. Digital marketing companies are real big into that. You might even hear the term hoteling in the business world. And what that means is, for example, the building that I'm in, we have, in my particular office, we actually have 15 offices. Out of the 15 offices, only 6 people have a designated office every day that they go to where they have their own personal pictures and all that stuff hung up. The remaining offices are for our salespeople and our other support people who come in and out, and they're hoteling. So they just step into that office for a second or a cubicle, hook up their laptop, and they're off and running. A lot of companies are going toward that. But again, it's a good thing to know because it helps you in the negotiating process. Relocation, that's a pretty critical issue. Most companies, large companies, will have a very formal relocation package. Anybody who's involved in any type of offer that is involved in relocation, you need to really see that package and read it thoroughly, make sure you understand it. Other things that can be compensated, when you're in the military and you needed to go to get some type of training, they sent you on TDY and it was charged to your unit. Well, here, there's sometimes, if you want to do your own professional development, companies will actually pay for that. So if I wanted to go to the Society of Human Resource Management for some type of training and some HR issue, my company might pay the membership, which is usually a couple $100s a year, but it's good because it helps keep you current in your skills. So that, you know, if a company can't maybe get you what you want on some of the other pieces of your offer, that's part of the negotiating piece as well.
Michael, we've got about 10 minutes left before we should probably stop and take some questions. So.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, how about we do this? We've got through most of the information, so I'd like to open it up for just kind of general questions, and I have a couple of closing comments on things to kind of talk about, because I think we got through the bulk of what we're looking for. What kind of questions would people have at this point?
I'm unmuting your microphones. Just please make sure you've got some quiet behind you. Okay.
Hey, this is Steve Vince. I've got several, but I've already asked several, so I want to stand by and see if others have questions. Let me ask one quick one. Are these slides going to be available?
This entire session, Steve, has been recorded. If Michael wants to make the slides available, he's able to do that.
Yeah, I just need to check offline, Bob, to do that. But if we can, we'll most definitely will. That's not necessarily my call, but I'll definitely look into it for you guys.
But Steve, this entire meeting is being recorded, and we will post it sometime tomorrow so that people can view it again at their leisure, and people who weren't here can look at it.
I think, Steve, some of the key things you'd want to take away from tonight is the list of items that can be negotiated beyond just base salary. I think that'd be helpful for someone who's transitioned into the civilian world.
I've got about 4 or 5 questions to throw at you. If I run out of time, I'll email them to you. I just sent you a LinkedIn invite, but let me shut up.
Do a little multitasking, okay? Next question, please.
Tony, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I do. I thank you for the where you talked about the negotiation piece beginning at basically the first contact. I just wanted to relay a story. I took an interview where I would have made more in retirement than I would have taken that job. And the company wouldn't let me know anything about the salary until I was there in the interview.
That's a great point, Tony, and that's what I was trying to emphasize before. Your time is valuable. You guys have things go on. So if people are playing games like that to get you into the company, what's that company going to be like once they've got you? So by all means, you have the right to know. But again, Tony, make sure you understand the difference between getting informed on a salary range and actually negotiating salary. Does that make sense, Tony?
Perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
other questions?
We're getting some feedback, so if you have a question, just raise your hand, which is what Chris Shippey has done. So, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, we appreciate your time today. I've got two, I guess one of them is, and I talked to Bob about this a few days ago. I was looking at a position at a company in Stuttgart, Germany, and it was going to be 6 months. It could be longer if the contract rolled over, but they didn't know if that would happen. So it was really could only be guaranteed of about 6 months worth of work. And I couldn't get past the recruiter who worked for the company. She was insistent that I give her a salary range. And I didn't know a lot about what the job was. I hadn't heard of it before, but it did sound interesting. But given that I had to come up with cost of living and those kind of things in Germany and try to make comparisons, et cetera, it was really hard to do. Is there a strategy to get past a recruiter to be able to get to someone who's there that could talk intelligently about what's the price of tea in China?
All right. Well, I would take this with a grain of salt. I've been in HR for 25 years, and to anybody that I deal with that's networking, if they're on the phone, any of the people I work with, they'll get a chuckle out of this. I always tell them to avoid HR like the plague, because they're not always in tune to what's going on. The hiring manager is. If there's any way you can deal directly with the hiring manager, especially once the hiring manager, Chris, has interest in you, because now there's all sorts of flexibility. But if you're
I could never get there. I tried and couldn't get past her.
Okay, but in that case, then you have to do the best you can with that person. But there's some other websites you could go to. You could look up expatriate websites where a person is being sent overseas for a while from a company, and you understand tax issues. There'll be some great articles on the Society of Human Resource Management website on expatriates, and then also how to repatriate back. Part of the deal there, Chris, is you also want to make sure you're going to be guaranteed an opportunity with the company when you come back. Being away from the company for 6 to 12 months in another country, a lot of things change, and you have to make sure you've got a place to land when you come back. But that would be expatriate strategies, expatriate information, expatriate programs. Those would be good things to communicate or to Google and check on the internet.
And if you,
And if I can ask,
if you do get to that point, Chris, or anybody, I actually have some expat contract agreements that I can sanitize and let you see what they look like.
and just to close the loop on the story, I was able to use some of the MC4 folks to eventually come up with a number. Unfortunately, it took me too long to do that. I couldn't make it happen, I think, in the timeline I wanted. If I can ask a second question on the negotiations, some of those, one slide that you had listed things like pension, medical, dental, those kinds of things, and you said that they were fairly fixed. I kind of had the impression that things like a medical plan may be something that I can negotiate with. And if retired military, we've got medical benefits, we've got a dental plan, although it's an expensive one. We have a dental plan that we come with. A pension plan, yeah, I guess that'd be interesting. But is there flexibility to negotiate for medical specifically? Because that's probably one of the bigger.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends, Chris, if you're asking from a macro or from a micro perspective. If you're asking, can I negotiate some other particulars so that I get this covered in my medical coverage or this covered in my dental coverage, you're not going to have that kind of flexibility.
Well, no, I think I'm actually asking the opposite. Do I have the option to say, thank you for the offer of the medical plan, I prefer the cash, I have my own medical plan?
Absolutely, saying, because typically the additional benefits are like another 29 to 33% of the cost of hiring you to take care of all those other benefits. So you're saving them costs by not using some of those benefits then.
What do you think the typical medical, run-of-the-mill medical plan is costing the company?
I would say anywhere between maybe per person. And also it depends on, whether it's individual, whether it's husband and wife and family and all that, but I would think somewhere between $7,500 and maybe $12,000, $15,000.
We'll borrow that from China. We'll be good to go.
Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Eric, your microphone is unmuted. Please ask your question.
Thanks, Bob. Mike, Eric Gunselman again. Appreciate all you're doing. I heard different from industry, and I've been going on a few interviews. I heard different on the medical. It's a law now, at least in the aerospace world, that they're following that they can't compensate, they can't offload the cash to the individual because of the impropriety or inequities that Congress has looked at and said government doesn't, because you've been in the government, the military shouldn't get a bump up in their salary. So I just wanted to throw that out there so there's level expectation. That's what I've been hearing. Thanks.
Great, Eric. That's news to me, and that also might be state by state. But that's, I belong to a Society of Human Resource Management. I haven't seen anything relative to that. I'm not saying what you're saying isn't true. I'm just saying do some more research on that and don't be afraid to ask the question.
And Eric, it could also be a function of the size of the company also. I would think that if you tried to convince Boeing to give you the money for the medical instead of, letting it go, they probably would say no. But if it was a small 100-person company, you might have a better shot. So there may be.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Bob, because companies have, some of the larger companies have what they call utilization rates. The more people that they get to take advantage of those benefits, they get a better deal then from the insurance company. Not all smaller companies operate like that.
Yeah, and small companies today some of them are getting crushed by the cost of medical care. So you may be able to, say, look, I won't take the medical, but will you put some of the money in my pocket? So there's no more. Eric, is that okay with you? Okay, so I don't think there's any more questions. If there are, just raise your hand, and I see it when it pops up on my screen. So, Michael, what?
While we're waiting for the next question, Bob, I was just going to say, I'm going to give everybody my email address real quick. And I do have one document. If you email me, I will email it to you. It's called Negotiating to Improve the Offer. It kind of summarizes what we've gone through and kind of puts it into maybe 5 to 7 different categories. So my email is my last name is Cuff, that's like cufflink without the link, mcuff@cciconsulting.com, or you can find it on LinkedIn. mcuff@cciconsulting.com. Tell me you would like the Negotiating to Improve the Offer document, and I'll send that on to you.
Michael, Steve Vincent. Go ahead.
I was going to say I'll also then look into the possibility of sharing the slides. I'll work that through, Bob.
Steve Vincent has a question.
Go ahead, Steve.
Hey, Mike, thanks again. I've got several. I'll throw them to you one at a time. You said 29 to 30% benefits as far as the overall compensation package sounded like an industry standard. So if I'm looking at a $100,000 job, it's probably $130,000 of total compensation is what I understand you to say.
In general terms, that would be correct.
Okay. When I was talking to a company, I'm still a year out from transitioning, and I was talking to a hiring manager at a public utility, and he was telling me that his company had a load factor of 1.63, and he seemed to indicate that that was above industry standard. So I guess what I don't understand is that if 29 to 30% is the kind of the norm as you're describing it, if they have a load factor of 1.63, but the salaries seem to be pretty similar to what all the other companies out there are paying, what am I missing? He seemed to.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand I'm not sure I understand what the load factor is, Steve.
Well, and the way, and it was the first time I had heard that term, but he used the term load factor for a position, implying that the total compensation package was 63% higher than the salary figure. So from what I understand you to say, that would be extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough to make comment. I'm just not familiar with that term, to be honest with you. When I hear load factor, I think of an airplane. How many passengers are on an airplane? That's the first time I've ever heard load factor relative to benefits or compensation.
Part of it is position dependent, I think, based on some of the items that Michael showed, that as you go up in terms of the level within the company and reach the more senior levels, there are benefits that are available that aren't generally available to to most of the company. Things such as
that's a great point, Bob. That may be what that gentleman's speaking about, Steve.
Okay, 2 other quick ones. Should I ever expect a recruiter to be doing the negotiating for me, or is this me doing this? And the second question is, as part of any kind of offer, is it normal for the company to give me a time commitment? Hey, if you go with us, here's the offer, but you must commit to X number of months or years with the company. Is either one of those normal?
Okay, a couple good questions, Steve. Typically, the way companies set it up, when I'm contacted by a company to go out and find them an engineer, and we find them and they hire them, after day 91, that's when we get paid. If that person would leave within the first 30 days of employment, we pay them back 60% of what we charge them. If they leave within the first, sometime within 30 to 60 days, we pay them back 30%. After day 91, we've met our commitment. But in terms of negotiating and who's driving what, you should be the person that's driving. They're just the voice. But here's what happens is, just like any industry, you're going to run into some people that are great recruiters that get it and that are big picture. And that if I help Steve get in this company and transition from the military and he has a good run for 5 or 6 years, and then I have another opportunity and I call him 6, 7 years later because I've done a good job with him, he might be interested for another opportunity. Those are the kind of folks you want to work with. But there are those who just look for the quick hit. And so at a certain point, they're not negotiating for you, they're negotiating for them. Because if you're set on that $90,000 base and the company's not budging from 85, they're not going to, they're only getting 25 or 30% of your salary if you take it. So they'd rather see 25 or 30% of 85 versus 0 of 90 that never took place. So you have to be selective, and you have to work with good recruiters. And the way you can do that, again, is through some networking, and guys will tell you who've had good experiences.
And
but the bottom line is you should be driving your negotiation. Do you, will they make the phone calls and go back and forth? Absolutely. But you have to make sure that what you want communicated is being communicated, and you have to know what it is that you want in terms of an offer, or what you're willing to at least accept.
And Steve, within MC4, there are some very, very good recruiters, both for some corporations as well as private recruiters that work for companies. And I'll just mention one of them, John Bolt, has done a great job with some different individuals. And so we don't yet have a way to easily identify the recruiters, but if you're interested in knowing who they are, email me and I can send you a list if you want.
Well, here's another tool you can use as well, Bob. You can go onto LinkedIn and you go into the groups. One of the groups are executive search firms, and you can search for groups on LinkedIn for very specific industries, and you'll get feedback, and you can make comments, or you could blog, or you can make comments, ask questions, and you'll get comments from other people who have used particular agencies, and they'll tell you, their level and their reputation in terms of being fair and trustworthy.
Okay, thanks.
Steve, on the other question you asked, can a company require you to agree to work a certain amount of time? It's actually, there's another piece to that. And if you get hired by a company and they need to send you to maybe 6 months at a university for very specific training or something like that, where they're going to invest a above normal amount of money in developing some specific skill in you, they might require that you commit to staying at the company for a certain amount of time after that training is completed. And if you don't do that, then you may be obligated to pay them back the cost of that training. And the reason they do that is because that training makes you more valuable.
And I would add this, that a lot of it is focused when people go get advanced degrees. And so the company is shelling out a lot of money. They want to make sure they're getting their ROI. So they may say, we'll pay for your MBA, but you have to provide us 4 years, 4 to 5 years, whatever, of service, so that at that time we feel we reap the benefit of your education. And that can mean a couple things. If they lay you, if you get laid off, and you get laid off in that 5-year period, you may owe them money back. If you get terminated, you may owe them money back. So there's all those different things you kind of have to consider. But as far as you owing anything to an employment agency or to a company who hired you in terms of staying as long as you want, that there's no such thing. And you also want to start to become familiar with terms such as employment at will. States that operate with employment at will basically mean that any company at any time can let you go for any reason, just like you can leave for any reason as well. Obviously there's a lot more details around it, but just do a little research on employment at will.
Michael, go ahead.
This is Steve. I have 2 more, but I don't want to monopolize things. I can hold them if there's others.
Well, there's nobody else with their hand raised.
Okay. As I'm looking at state income taxes as a relevant factor in where I focus my job search, some will tax a military retirement, some will not. What I haven't really been able to figure out is a company is headquartered in, I'll give you a specific example. Say a company is headquartered in Oregon, which has a state income tax, but the job site is in the state of Washington, which has no state income tax, what rule applies to me?
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's the state that you, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I can actually answer that because I experienced that
Great.
a lot. I have been consulting with Bogan Communications here in New Jersey now for almost 4 months. And Bogan hired me as a consultant. There's a consultant agreement. I can do that work anywhere I want, including at my house in New Hampshire. Bogan would get invoiced every 2 weeks by me from New Hampshire. They would send the check to my house in New Hampshire, and I didn't have to pay state taxes to New Jersey. I did pay federal taxes on a quarterly basis. On Friday, I'm actually going to work for Bogan now full-time. They finally decided to make me an offer that I would have been stupid to refuse. Because of that, my work location is now Ramsey, New Jersey, even though I'll be commuting between here and New Hampshire, and I'm obligated to pay New Jersey state taxes. When I was consulting with Brooks Automation in Massachusetts, it was the same deal. I wasn't paying taxes to Massachusetts and I was working in China. So it's a state-by-state deal. I can tell you that New York is extraordinarily difficult. New York, if you never step foot in the state, but yet you are connecting to a company server that's located in New York, they will claim that you owe them taxes. So it's a state-by-state thing.
A good site, Steve, to get more information about that is the Department of Labor, and also you do some research on something called the FSLA, Fair Standards Labor Act. Has some good information on that about what companies can do, taxes, pay ranges, that type of thing.
Now, what it ultimately will come down to is where the company says your work location is. If they say that it's in the state in which state income taxes are due, then you'll have to pay them. If your work location is in the state where there are no taxes due, then you don't have to pay them. It really depends on where the company says your work location is. If I could have gotten Bogan to agree that my work location was Windham, New Hampshire, I would not have to pay taxes to New Jersey.
Okay. The next question is, so I'm transitioning in about a year. I'm a Navy 06, looking broadly in the utility field, water, electrical power, etc. It's not my primary forte in the Navy, so it's a little bit of a career shift for me, a little bit of a skill set shift. So the basic question is this: I recognize that I may need to take a position that is not a lateral position, but it may be a step down in order to get my foot into the industry and count on the fact that once I'm in, I can prove myself and move up. So this goes back to the comment that Michael made earlier about the first and second quartile. If I know what the pay band is for a particular position, I would have thought in the negotiating, I would have, if I know what the pay band is, it would almost feel to me to be seem silly not to come in at the high end.
But you have to be able to justify that, Steve. So as you think about what you just said, I'm coming in and I'm going to be doing some things almost like transitioning, or I've got some transitional skills that kind of relate to what I might be getting into, but not exactly. The people who are going to get the high end of the range, Steve, are those people who bring the direct experience. And
I understand. I understand that completely. And so I guess the question is this. So let me take a specific example. An equivalent government service pay grade for 06 would be the GS-15 pay grade. So let's say, for example, that I want to try to get my foot in the door with EPA or Army Corps of Engineers doing project management, where I'm doing something in the energy field. okay, if I was going into a Navy GS position, I would probably be very confident that I could walk through the door as a GS-15, which in the Seattle area has a pay band that goes from 121 to 153. But if I'm going to EPA or some other government agency where I'm trying to get into energy, water utilities, I might have to go after a GS-13 job, which has a pay band of 87 to 110. I understand that at the GS-15, I'm not going to be able to ask for the upper end of the pay band. But if I'm consciously targeting a lower level position that I am fully qualified or even overqualified for, it would now be appropriate then for me to ask for the upper end of the pay band? Or did I understand you to say that it would be silly to ask for anything over the second quartile?
Well, to me, it's two things. I look at this. There's 100% factor that if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. But what I always say is ask smart. You've got to kind of have a basic idea of what the job is and how well you think those skills relate. I'm not that familiar. I can't say a lot relative to government pay grades, but I can tell you in the civilian world, there will be flexibility, but the flexibility is all based on how much value they feel that you can bring. I got a sense that with some of the government pay ranges, a lot of it seems to be like a checklist. You have to have very specific education, very specific amount of experience, and a unique skill, whatever. You meet all that criteria, that might give you some of the flexibility to be considered. It's not necessarily that cut and dry in the civilian world. So I don't know if I can actually address that for you, Steve, from your GS grade perspective.
Yeah, and I was using GS just as a frame of reference. Is it a true statement to say that whatever job, whatever salary compensation I accept in my first post-Navy job, that will basically be here's what I've been told, is that whatever job you take first is going to set your benchmark for salary, so that anything that's even remotely similar to that in the second or third job is only going to, you would not realistically expect more than a couple thousand more than what you benchmarked yourself.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. And a couple things. I think most people have to kind of realize you may need to make one or two moves to eventually get to where you're at. The main thing is to transition out of the military and get a decent job to get you started and get you broken into the civilian way of doing things, and then you go from there. Because here's the thing, when you have those salary ranges, those companies that tend to pay lower on their salary ranges, they are targets constantly for their good people being picked off by other companies because they're paying at a 15 or 20% higher rate. So if you're doing good, that won't be an issue if you're producing.
And remember that
you'll either move up with that company or you'll be valued by another company who will pay for you.
Remember, Steve, that companies pay based on value that you can bring to the organization, perceived or real. So if in a prior role that you had, you were able to make some significant accomplishments or breakthroughs or something like that, then a company may look at that and be very, very willing to pay you handsomely to bring that skill or experience to them. You know, someday you and I can talk on the phone, and my own career is a classic example of that.
When I'm negotiating, and you listed several elements in an offer: title, salary, reporting, senior duties, etc. So is it a true statement to say that a job offer, it may come on the phone or by email initially, but I don't really have an offer until I have a piece of paper from them, from the hiring manager or HR, that lists those specific things? So that's question one. And then question two is, if I'm talking to different companies, doing multiple interviews at the same time, working a couple different companies, how long is it appropriate to let that offer sit on the table while you compare offers?
Couple things. Going to your first question. Yes, everything that is verbalized to you needs to be documented. And if it's not, go back and get it documented. If they don't document it, then you may want to rethink that decision about joining that organization. Number two, juggling multiple offers. that's where I said before, you have to start first with that criteria. What's the key things? This company offers this, I like the base salary, but it's a longer drive and they don't have as good as benefits. This company is paying a little bit less than the other offer, but they seem to be growing faster. You factor all those things in. Typically, what companies will do, if they want you, they'll wait for a day or two. It's very acceptable to say, I need 2 days to sit down and go over this offer. This is a critical move for me. I'm transitioning out of the military. I need to speak to my family and make sure this is good. But beyond 48 hours, the companies start to get a little bit concerned about that. So once an offer is made, if there's no other offers, 24 to 48 hours is fair. If you're juggling multiple offers, then you've got some decisions to make. So you can say, look, I'm interested in your company, but I also have another offer from so-and-so. They should be, I've been told they're going to make an offer to me on Thursday. That's 2 more days from now. I'd like to be able to get back to you on Friday with my final decision. Is that acceptable? Some companies will say, some companies are going to say, that's no problem, we'll wait for you. Others are going to say, we can't wait that long, we'll need your decision by Thursday.
Okay, is there anything inappropriate about telling company A what company B has offered you?
No, that's part of your negotiating ploy. But you have to be sincere and you can't be blowing smoke because it's a big world, small neighborhood. Look,
Yeah,
I'm really interested in
that went back to the question about confidentiality.
Say that again?
I understand what you're saying. My question was rooted back in the issue of salary confidentiality.
Well, you can go and say, look, I've been offered by such and such, I've been offered this amount by this company, but you can't go and take that salary information and start spreading it to employees inside that company. You have to also remember that you're dealing with people in HR or other hiring managers from other companies who are used to dealing with this information and handling it confidentially. But if I'm offering you a job and you got another offer from somewhere else, how am I going to negotiate fairly with you if you're not telling me what that other offer is so I can see what I might be able to do to increase that?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's all new to me.
No problem. Those are good questions.
We don't have any more hands raised. Steve, are you all set?
Yeah, I think I got everything. Again, this is my other thing that I'm looking at is as I look at what military compensation is, and then you have to factor in the allowances. That's more than I think I'm realistically going to be able to command from a company out there. So
let me just offer you this, Steve. If you kind of think that way, that's what you're going to find. If you're looking for it, you can find it. You just have to be confident in what you want and be able to communicate and verbalize why you're worth it. But if you go in expecting you're going to get less, you will. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying, and then I go on LinkedIn and have the discussions with any number of really smart, savvy 06s, retired 06s, who basically their one piece of advice they throw at you is, hey, look, if you're expecting to walk in someplace as a consultant, as a contractor, and pull down 120K, you're smoking crack and you need to recalibrate yourself.
Well, it all depends on how relative, how related your skill is to the company, what they're doing. If it's a direct correlation, that shouldn't necessarily be a problem. That's why I try to communicate up front. You have to understand realistically, do I have a job that's pretty transferable into the military world, and my years of service are going to be considered as experience, or do I have something that's on the periphery and I really don't have that much of experience because it's not really directly right into that technology? That's the missing piece there.
Steve, let me give you, because I agree with Michael, and I think that, and I'll give you an example. There's somebody that I'm working with who's expecting an offer that is about $30,000 more than he actually thought he would get. And it comes down to being able to demonstrate the value that you can bring to the organization. And I think that that's one of the biggest weaknesses that I see, and I suspect Michael and others do, in being able to effectively and clearly communicate the value that you can bring, either because of your leadership skills, your knowledge, your experience, whatever it might be. That is absolutely key to being able to maximize the salary opportunity that can be available to you. And it's one of the things that I think all of us who are coaching folks in MC4 try to get across.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think I'm still on the path to getting past this feeling that it's arrogant to say me when I'm so used to saying we. Everything that I've got in my resume that says I or me was the product of a team.
Yeah.
I'm still working past that.
No, that's a good point, Steve. But unfortunately, these other we's aren't going to be in the room or on the phone when you're negotiating the deal. So that is a tough transition from the military to the civilian world. I mean, that's you're you know. But to go back what Bob said too. So how do you try to go through that? The better you can be at communicating the value you bring to the company and what you can do in terms of driving revenue, reducing safety issues, bringing on new customers, whatever the hot button is, that in the end is going to really determine how much flexibility they'll give you in the salary.
Steve, you bring up an interesting point, because when I get out, and even though it was back in the late 70s, the first job, the guy gave me the job because I was a Vietnam vet, and so wasn't he, and he thought we should stick together. I didn't even know what the company did. But the second job, when I interviewed for it, I was still using the word we. And finally somebody said to me, we who? How much of this did you do and how much of this did other people do? But here's the irony. You will learn to talk about what you did and what you contributed. And I think that there's ways to be able to help isolate those kinds of things. But I'll tell you this, you don't ever want to work for a company where everybody walks around saying, I did this, I did this, I did that. You need to be able to talk about what you did and what you contributed as an individual, but you want to work for a company in which people think in terms of the word we. It's a much better environment, and you can get a lot more done. But I have worked in an organization where everybody was, I did this, I did that, and it can be pretty difficult. Chris Shippey.
Yeah, it seems a little bit of an oxymoron, maybe the wrong term, but what you're trying to highlight is your individual leadership talent and ability, but that is irrelevant unless it's done in the context of a team.
That's a great way of phrasing it, Steve. I would hang on. I'd keep that in your back pocket. That's a great way of phrasing it.
All right.
Bob, can I interject here?
Chris Shippey has a question.
Well, actually, no, yeah, Bob, I was actually going to interject on something Steve said. Steve, I'm a 30-year 06 retired Air Force, 1 December 10. And, you know, the total compensation package for an 06 with housing and the BAS and all that, I was pulling in 146 here in Montgomery, Alabama. So, you know, you can live like a king around here on that kind of money. And I had the same thought you did. Well, my first job out of the chute needs to be, I really kind of need to hold the line on that because I'm worried about that setting a benchmark for my future salary history. And by the way, I still haven't found a job yet because the kind of compensation package that I've been looking for just doesn't exist around here, at least right now under the current circumstances, with the drawdown of contracting money and civilian positions and all that stuff. It's just not here. And I actually ended up passing on a job about 3 months ago that I would have been a really good fit for, but we never got past the part where we were even in the ballpark when we're talking about money. And I'm looking back at it now, wishing I had taken it. And what's coming to me in the course of this conversation is what matters, I think, is where you're being offered that money. Because if the compensation package, the $122,000 base salary that you made reference to that I was making when I retired, I can find that job in Washington, D.C., but I can't find it here in Montgomery, Alabama. But there's no way in hell I would take that kind of job in Washington, D.C. So I don't know what, I think you're on Seattle area. I have no idea what Seattle offers, what the typical salaries are there, but I can live on a whole lot less than that here in Montgomery, Alabama.
Great point, Chris, and I think that was kind of covered in some of the earlier slides about factoring in geography. Great point.
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time on cost of living comparison by city, and there's some, you know, that's a relevant factor as I look at where I'm looking to apply. Yeah, I had just talked to some retired 06s that were pretty much, you know, dead set that, hey, whatever you start with is going to benchmark you, and you're going to be locked into, you know, plus or minus 5% of that on your.
And I've heard the same thing, but you know, maybe 10% on the next job, and that caused me to hold out on what I probably would have been a pretty good fit for.
Yeah, Steve, I can tell you that it is role dependent, it's company dependent, and it's value dependent. I will tell you this, I have gone from one job to another. I think when I left Siemens and went to work for Teradyne, my salary went up $20,000,
Okay.
which probably was, you know, a 15%. No, it wasn't 15%. It was a pretty good increase in terms of the percentage. So it's truly value dependent. But I will tell you another thing that it's dependent upon: the unemployment rate and the issues around salary right now. And I think Michael will agree with this. When you have an unemployment rate of 9.1%, you've got a greater pool of candidates out there looking for a job who are willing to accept less money. Now, Michael can comment on what his experience is, but I think that for many jobs today, the salaries are deflated because of the pool of candidates and because of, you know, the unemployment rate. There's a greater pool of people who are willing to work for less. Michael, what do you think of that?
Well, typically the people who are willing to work for less don't have the driving top skills.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people that are getting some pretty significant increases, but because they're either working with current technology, the hot technology, and they're doing everything they can to stay current. Those people that are struggling, when the pharmaceutical industry laid off all those people, you had guys who were making $140,000, $150,000 a year at jobs that were really valued at $100,000. They got lazy. There was comfort. I call it comfort in the danger in the comfort zone. They got comfortable with that, and that's how they got into trouble. And they didn't go back and get a graduate degree. They didn't take seminars. They didn't network. They didn't do all these different things. So those people do have to go backwards. The ones who've been adding to their skill set and keeping it current, especially if they're in an emerging industry or technology, they're getting great offers.
Yeah.
Let me throw you another one. The other end of the spectrum is I had an 06, been retired about 10 years now as a senior position with a defense contractor. His comment to me was that an 06 who's had command experience is marketable. An 06 who's had command experience and has 1 or 2 years of civilian business experience is very, very marketable. And then in most of the transition books, there's the discussion of that transition job. I think what I'm still coming to terms with is that first job, I want to think of as being that long-term thing, but more realistically, it is probably something where I am acclimating to the business world, learning, and it's probably a transition job. And where the heck was I going with my comment there? But I guess, what is your experience as you work with guys in this group? Is it pretty much the case that first position is a transition one where they learn, they cut their teeth, and then move on? And is there any, I know we're all individuals, but I tend to find myself drawn towards the IBMs, the GEs, where it is business, but it is a much more regimented, military-like organization that I think I would probably have a more successful transition in.
Well, I would just comment on this. A person who's coming right out of college today, by the time they're 30 or 35, they'll probably already had 5 to 6 different jobs. The days of staying someplace 20 and 30 years are getting more and more difficult, only because the market it changes so quickly, and same with the technology. So, you know, that I don't know how realistic that is, but I think you made a good point Steve, the comment about maybe I just need to take this transitional step to kind of be a springboard. If you take that approach, Steve, you're really then driving your career, because, and that's what this is all about. Let me get in the game, and I'm going to stay here for 18 to 24 months, get experience. Then I'm during that time, I'm a passive job looker. If something good comes around, I'll go. If not, I'm going to start being active at the 2.5 year mark, because now I've got more skills. I understand the verbiage, I understand the lingo, understand how the corporate world works. Now I've got something to offer along with all this great command experience.
And there's an argument that could be made along what Michael is saying, that if you have to choose between two jobs, one job that might be a stretch but might pay $6,000 a year more, and a second job that pays $6,000 less, but you could do standing on your head and absolutely go in and make valuable and significant contributions to the organization, that might be the job to think about, because that's what's going to be on your resume. And it's just a thought. But if you can get into a company where you know that you're going to be very successful because it's in your sweet spot, you can make the kinds of contributions that would be valuable to another organization, that may be worth an investment of your 18 to 24 months, because you're going to be able to carry that forward with you. But that's just a thought.
But one piece that we're not talking about is the enjoyment you're going to have. I can't tell you the number of guys that I coach that have been making a lot of money, but they're not happy. So, I mean, obviously we got to eat, we got to pay our bills, and we're trying to provide the best we can for our family, but at what point is enough too much, or, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So you have to kind of do some soul searching with that. You take a look, I can just tell you from corporate America, think about the guys you know in corporate America. How many of those guys really enjoy what they're doing? How many are motivated by their work? How many of it's not even work to them because they're enjoying it so much? How many of those guys are trying to just do the best they can because they're trying to provide for their family, and they're good guys and they're going to a job that they hate, but they're providing for their family? And then the last group, how many guys hate what they're doing, but they're making good money, but they're miserable? So you got to factor all that in too.
Michael raises a good point. I don't know how many hours a week he works. I can tell you that it's not uncommon for me to work 65 or 70 hours a week. Now, I get paid, pretty well for that. But I think the point that Michael made earlier is the higher you are in the organization, the more money you're going to make, the more responsibility you're going to have, and it will stop being a 40-hour-a-week job, and it will turn into something more. And you need to be recognized that you're not going to make the levels of money that you would eventually like to make, and not have that baggage that comes with it.
That's the balance of work life that we talk about, and also setting your priorities. What is the priority? I want a good paying job, but I want to balance it to be able to see my wife and know who my kids are. But that's a personal choice.
Yeah, I need to find that thing that's somewhere on the sliding bar scale between saving the planet and watching little boys play soccer.
There you go.
Okay, so Ruben has a question.
Okay.
Ruben? Ruben? Steve, you have another question?
No, I just put my hand down, but looked like my hand was still raised. I just put it down.
Okay. Ruben says his microphone's not working. Ruben is asking, veteran unemployment is 11.5% according to the Department of Labor. And
Ruben, can I make a comment, Bob?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell Ruben that I think that the Department of Labor is undercounting. I think
and I just want to say this, in those numbers, you can never determine and quantify an individual man's desire to find a job. When I'm counseling people, I tell them the first thing is shut off the newspaper, because it's only going to give you a dispirited approach. If you want it, it's out there, but you have to be willing to do something more than somebody else. Those statistics drive me crazy, but they don't talk about the fact that there are people who are getting good jobs, who are networking, who are out there, who have good skills. They just focus on that. I guarantee you. And I'm not trying to downplay anybody's difficulty in finding work, But my experience of 25 years is a third of the people actually take control of their situation and go out and get a job that they desire. A third settle for something that comes to them. And the third never quite get to the level they want because they just don't know how to fend for themselves. That, I can't tell you how critical that is.
Steve, did you have another question?
I guess that struck in a chord. Oh, that was dead silent.
No, I don't. I mean, if you give me long enough, and I'll talk your ear off. But
Okay. Well,
I think my
we're
big ones are answered.
We're going to continue to do these. Michael, do you want to just finish up and then I'll close it out and we can all go
What I want
watch?
to talk about real quick is the sites. If you want to go and take a look at some comparison salaries, there's something called salary calculators, paycheck calculators, about salary comparison. I think Steve mentioned the Glassdoor. And there's also, you can find some salary information on Indeed.com. So again, salary calculators, paycheck calculators, about salary.com comparisons, Glassdoor.com, Indeed.com salary comparisons.
And I think on LinkedIn, when you click on specific jobs, it'll often give you a comparison, a salary comparison for a specific position.
That's correct.
Okay, so unless somebody else has a question, first, thank you for being part of this. It's our second one. It has been recorded, and by tomorrow it will be posted somewhere so that you can look at it again, skip through it to get to the sections that you want. Please email Michael or I your feedback, or you can post the feedback, good, bad, or ugly, on the MC4 discussion site. And don't forget that tomorrow night I will be leading one of these around maximizing your use of LinkedIn and how to use it for both networking as well as finding a job and some of the LinkedIn fundamentals and basics. So if you haven't registered for that one yet and you don't have anything else to do, maybe we'll see you at that one. But I do want to thank you for taking... Sorry?
I was going to say, just in closing, again, anybody that has questions, all my contact information is on my LinkedIn profile. I'll be more than glad to address anything offline, one-on-one.
This is
So,
thank you to both of you. It's very, very helpful.
With that,
You're very welcome. Thank you.
we're going to end this, and again, thank you. And Michael, thank you. I know that you spent a lot of time putting this presentation together, and I certainly appreciate it. And in the future, we'll run another one.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, guys. Good luck to everybody.